Hey, VA, how are you?
Hey, Jason, how are you?
I'm really good.
That's good. This is
Mm.
new. I haven't seen the beard before.
No, no, just adjust my camera a bit. Yeah, no, the beard is yes. That's I don't know whether it makes me look older or more distinguished. I'm still trying to work that one out.
Let's go to the shall we?
Yeah, good idea. Good idea.
How have you been? What a crazy year we've just gone through.
I know it is crazy. It's being made all crazier by where we're literally a week and a half away from a rebrand at the moment. So Fuji Xerox is changing its name.
And I assume you can't tell us what to.
Oh no, it's yeah, it's out in the marketplace. So the long story short is that the technology agreement that Fuji Xerox had with Xerox Corp in America, they couldn't come to terms, so they've parted ways. So as of the 1st of April, we will be known as Fujifilm Business Innovation. So our parent company is Fujifilm. So the Xerox is going to be dropped. So we've got 3 years to deprecate the brand, but there's a whole swag of stuff that needs to be done for launch day. So we are right in the thick of it at the moment.
Oh, that's super exciting for you and your team.
Yeah, no, it is. It's been great, but it's also been a nightmare at the same time. So,
Yeah.
yeah, very glad once we get over this first deadline. There's still a lot of work to be done after that, but yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah, and welcome to the Creative Studio Insider podcast. I really appreciate you
You?
having me today.
Thank you very much.
And for our listeners, this is Jason Freestone, who is the creative services manager at, well, I wanted to say Fuji Xerox.
Well, you can certainly say Fujifilm Business Innovation. So.
Fuji Film Business Innovation. I think we
Yes.
first met, you've had such an interesting career. I think we first met when you were in publishing with Hinkler. You were the student
Yes.
operations
Yes.
manager.
Yes, absolutely. So that was kind of the start of my second act. So I'd probably spent about, I don't know, 12, 13 years in advertising prior to that. And yeah, it was very interesting moving to publishing. Probably one of the industries I'd love working in most, I must admit.
And can you
Really
tell
enjoyed
us
it.
why?
I think, well, firstly, it was a massive change of pace. So going from deadlines that were minutes, hours, and days to deadlines that were days, months, and potentially years sometimes. So that's how long some things stay in development. But it was more than just that. It was just the whole process, creating something tangible you can hold in your hands, something that there's not transient. So it's it goes on the shelf and can last generations. So I really enjoyed the process, and so that was something really fun.
I can remember going there and you took me into, I think it was a showroom that was just
Yeah,
literally full of books and toys and things like that.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was yeah. So the type of publisher Hinkler is, they do a lot of value add stuff. So you get your yoga DVD and the ball and the mat and everything in a kit. So that stuff's really fun to work on.
Absolutely. And what was the transition like for you to go from agency to in-house back then?
It took a while, I must admit, because it's obviously a different culture. But like I said, for me, I suppose the transition away from agency life came to the fore when I started to have kids, and the whole thought of constantly working back to 8, 9 o'clock at night to get stuff done. Just wanted to sort of shift priorities a little bit. So that's what really attracted me to it. But yeah, like I said, it's a really, really interesting and fulfilling industry to work in. So,
Well, that shift kind of set you on the path to be in-house. I know you've sort of
yep.
flipped a little bit, but you've had some great in-house roles. Let's
Mm.
start with Fujifilm, um,
Yeah.
where you moved to. So many of our listeners will absolutely recognize the brand, but
Sure.
not the extent of the service offerings. Why does a company like that need a creative services manager, someone like you?
Yeah, I get this question all the time. So everyone goes, don't you make photocopiers and toner and paper? And yes, absolutely, that's the core business. But behind that is there's a ton of solutions and services that they manage and maintain. There's lots of stuff around workflow automation and software integration. There's a big professional services team that help build bespoke solutions for customers. The area of the business that I work in is essentially the operations business. So that's where the rubber hits the road. So a lot of our time spent directly with customers. So we have a lot of, so for example, when we talk about operations, we've got, print rooms in with customers. We manage mail houses. We've got big scanning facilities. We've got some areas of our business that generate massive documents and invoice statements and invoice processing. So there's a whole lot of that sort of thing. But the part of the business I work in is obviously creative and digital communications. It's just one of many lines of service that Fuji Xerox / Fujifilm Business Innovation manages. So a lot of the stuff that I do is actually working with customers. So even though you kind of consider it in-house, it's actually probably more like a traditional agency environment than you would think. It is a little bit of a barrier to entry sometimes when people go, well, hang on a second, why am I talking to you? Why aren't I talking to an advertising agency? So one of the things that we tend to focus on too is a lot of our stuff is probably below the line activity. So we don't generally go after the highbrow creative or strategic accounts because that's not where we offer the most amount of value. So we position ourselves just below the line, and we're really focused on value for money. So we have a lot of partnerships with agencies where they will produce the creative, and we'll push out all the assets. We'll localize it. Some of our customers, we're getting content from offshore, from head offices in America and the UK, and we spend a lot of time localizing that for local market.
Okay, and so typically, who are your clients?
It's actually a reasonably broad base. So we've got clients that sit in the financial services industry. We've got retail clients. We've got a lot in education. So, and that's a broad range too. So sort of both tertiary and secondary. I suppose one of the things that's changed a bit for Fuji Xerox, probably because this is my second tour of duty with Fuji Xerox. One of the things that's changed since I've come back is the fact that there's been quite a pivot from we had a lot of in-plant creative in on site with customers, and that's pivoted slightly, and that's actually true for all of our operational components. So there's a lot more activity that's being done centralized. So through our central studio, and because of that, we've actually amalgamated quite a bit of our talent into a single pool for that. So what that means is that a lot of customers, one of the things they've realised really quite quickly over the past few years is the fact that previously, where they've had like a really big installation on site, like a big studio, we used to have a really big one with the financial services industry, 12 plus people on site. The footprint, the cost for the office space, all of those sort of things were an overhead that they were paying, the customer was paying. So now what we do is we generally have the required talent on site for specific day-to-day activity, and we push everything else off site.
Okay, so what is the makeup of your team these days then? What sort of roles?
Yeah, so we've got a fairly broad base. Obviously, there's a huge push towards digital execution. So we've got our traditional design team. We've also got some digital producers, developer talent. Myself, that kind of sits in between all of this and tries to make connections between it all sometimes. So my role coming back to Fuji Xerox has actually changed quite a bit too. So previously I was National Creative Studio Manager, and I was looking after a couple of studios, plus sort of having some operational oversight to some of those installations.
I think you had about direct reports or something, didn't you, back then? It was a big
so it was a pretty crazy time. So my direct teams are obviously a little bit smaller now, but I've actually got additional roles that fall under my remit. So we've got a multi-channel marketing tool that I head up. So I've got all of the wonderful thoughts and considerations around costs and implementation, and all the technical side to consider as well. So yeah, it's been a really interesting start to my second tenure with Fuji Xerox, and there's lots of really fun stuff coming up.
And so how has the business evolved in the few years it's been since you were there before now? Because so much has changed, particularly in that digital space. Talk to me a little bit about how that business has evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I think one of the things that's really pushed this is the fact that with COVID, digital transformation has been accelerated across all businesses, and that's something that there's been a lot of focus on. It's been really quite tough for Fuji Xerox because obviously, as you know, when we mentioned that Fuji Xerox's traditional core business is still photocopiers and paper and toner. And that's not necessarily going to change overnight, but all of the different services that we offer is our way to differentiate and broaden our service offerings so that we can mitigate that. We don't want to be another Kodak. We don't want a situation where our industry disappears overnight. So, but one of the things that I'm really keen to highlight is that from my perspective, the way that we try and operate is truly in a multi-channel execution. So we try and pick the right channel of communication that's appropriate to the audience that we're talking to. So a lot of our campaigns, yeah, look, there's lots of digital execution, there's EDMs and microsites and all the good stuff and the social aspects, but we also, there's no use sending an EDM or hitting people on social if that's not the right channel for them. So, you don't want to hit the elderly with that sort of stuff. We also really trying to focus on mixed execution for some of our traditional business as well. So we do a lot in the procurement space. Okay. So we do a lot of printing ourselves, but we also outsource to the network of premier partners that we have. And we're trying to look at creative solutions to deliver on that as well. So, for example, when you would traditionally do a large mail out for a customer, the average cost of a mail out could be upwards of $1 or $1.50 per unit. So what we're doing now is trying to be smart about that. So we'll do an email blast, and then based on either bounce backs or no activity, we'll then address them with a print execution after that. So we still get we still get the transformation component, like we're still pushing people to a digital execution, but we can still follow up with the print execution as well. Best of both worlds, and also reduces the broad-based cost.
In between the Fuji roles, you had some really great contracts. I think you were the design studio manager at Southeast Water.
Yep.
At Australian Red Cross, where you were the creative studio manager, two really different businesses. Can you share some highlights from each of those roles for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So they are completely different businesses. So the Red Cross, for me, I loved working there. They are an amazing company with amazing people. What they do, everything they do, centers around getting people in the door to donate blood. The most important thing about it too is, and a lot of people don't realize that whole blood only has a shelf life of 42 days. So you need to get it in the door, you need to process it, you need to get it to the people who need it before that time frame expires. And every single day, the activity that we used to do would be just about pushing and trying to get people in the door. So we would look at the stats and requirements every single day to determine, right, what do we need to do to get more people in the door. That was crazy, and that was a really hectic role. So a lot of what I was doing there was about trying to work out how we could streamline process to be able to get that kind of communication out as effectively and quickly as possible. Because some of it was literally you get notified in the morning, and by the afternoon you need to get a piece of communication out to really target a specific requirement. So, for example, blood doesn't come in one shape. There's all the different blood types, and some of them are more rare than others. So sometimes we would be getting calls out specifically for different types of blood so that we could actually meet need. It's a really fascinating company to work for, and the amount of work they go through, the processing facilities and all of the hard work that goes into that. So,
are you talking about digital marketing strategies? Getting the message out on all the social platforms, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a specific team just dedicated to social there at the Red Cross. So my team would feed into multiple departments. A lot of their work too was related to just building greater community ties. So there'd be lots of blood drives with different organisations, and a lot of the work that was spent was actually trying to drive that competitive edge between certain industries. So, for example, there was always an essential services campaign every year where you'd have the police against the fireys, against everyone else, and that competition helped drive not just more donations, but awareness of what they were doing in the community to get everyone on board.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a big one. And Southeast Water, again, another amazing group of people. Like, you don't actually think about what goes into keeping an essential service like water running. There's all the treatment services. There's the maintenance of an array of infrastructure that's been in place for almost 100 years. You're talking about pipes that burst, like all the time and effort it takes to keep on top of that and maintain it. There's also an amazingly huge focus on sustainability for Southeast Water. So they've actually got quite a few awards for implementation of what they call Aquariva, which is a sustainable housing estate. So all of the houses on there have got recycled water. They've got a whole range of water saving initiatives built in by the builder into this. Amazing stuff. Really great. I actually loved working with Southeast Water.
That just should be law for all future developments.
Absolutely, it should be, for sure. But what I find really interesting, when you say, what are the differences between the two? They are completely different businesses, but very similar challenges. So for me, the difference between Red Cross and Southeast Water from a creative execution perspective, the challenge that I faced with both those companies was coming in companies that have been in play for a very long time, and their requirements have grown moderately over time. So it's one of those things I like to refer to as, when a business evolves slowly, they don't necessarily see the cracks until there's a pool of water on the floor. Me coming in was just trying to shore up process and put things in place so that they could be more effective and they can get their requirements executed as quickly as possible.
Yeah. When I look closely, actually, no, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about the common challenges between all of the different companies with regards to getting buy-in from the wider business for creative services. What's been some of the challenges that you've faced, and how have you overcome them?
So buy-in's difficult. So when we talk client side, one of the first challenges that most people, especially coming from advertising, would spot would be the fact that the less creative the stakeholders you deal with, the less they know about what you do, the harder your job becomes. So that's one of the things that I find to be that is quite jarring to start with. Your job does get harder. You've got to make sure that when you interact with these people that you don't spend too much time spinning your wheels on the scoping component. There's a lot of time reverse briefing, and I would always encourage people to take the time to educate the stakeholders they deal with, to make sure that if it's something that you're teaching that is new, that you take the time to explain it efficiently, so that way the next time they come with a similar challenge, they already have some ideas about what information you'll need to be able to execute effectively. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. Can you repeat your original question?
But talking about the buy-in, which is a very, very common struggle that creative services or studio managers have. The one thing that I know when I look at your career is that it's about structure, it's about work practices of each of the studios that you personally seem to get very, very involved in. Rather than the delivery of the content. This systems and procedures piece for you has
yes, I've dug a hole for myself.
It's been big, hasn't it?
Absolutely. So I have kind of fallen into a bit of a pattern to being Mr. Fix-It when it comes to process, and which is great because I love doing that. I think getting buy-in from the business, I've been fortunate enough that because most of the companies I've dealt with, and this has been a common theme, they already know that these things need fixing. So buy-ins hasn't been a huge issue for me, because that's kind of been the agenda from day one. But I think, like sort of what I was trying to allude to a little bit earlier, getting people to understand the value of what you do in a creative space can quite often be challenging when they don't have much knowledge of it. The old, especially when you present a quote or an estimate on how much, how long, or what kind of investments required. You can quite often get the old, oh, I can do that in Paint in half an hour. Why is it costing me $2,000? That sort of thing. So that can be quite challenging. Like I said, for me, the big part about that is just educating them. I think one of the really big challenges too is working on any project for me is just trying to clearly understand the objectives and desired outcomes as early as possible in the piece. And I went to a project management course a few years ago, and one of the only things that really stuck in my mind and has been absolutely key to every project I've worked on since is just making sure that every project has a corporate sponsor. That's the person whose job or bonus is on the line if something doesn't happen. Because if you've got that specific person on side, they're the one who will make the decisions, approve the costs, get things moving. So
imagine they would. And more and more studio managers are talking about agile transformation and the role that it's playing in creating that sort of flexible, collaborative, creative services studio. What are your thoughts and experiences using similar methodologies to unlock that agility?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, because it's probably an area I struggle with a little bit. I'm an old school ad guy. Like, for me, I walked out of university knowing PageMaker and Quark Express. So agile method. Yeah, exactly. Agile methodologies, when you start talking about iterative approach and being able to have parallel work streams, lots of stuff, all that's extremely valuable. Where I struggle with agile sometimes is that when people come to you with a definitive budget, sometimes agile can be quite challenging in that sort of landscape. I am working on it personally. Like I said, we're still using the old quarter-hour increment billing methodology that sort of is entrenched in advertising, and I truly want to be able to move away from that to more of a value-based system for determining value as far as work stream. I think agile's great. I think it tends to sometimes be misconstrued. People think agile just means flexible. It's not necessarily the case. And I think a lot of the stuff we do in creative traditionally has got an agile approach. It is iterative. You send your first draft, you wait for feedback, that sort of thing. But being able to have parallel work streams is really important. So if you can plan your project in advance and know all the moving parts, you can certainly get an agile workflow happening.
Yeah. Is there any particular tech that you're using right now that perhaps you weren't using pre-COVID?
Yeah, I wouldn't say specific tech around agile, but what I would say is that part of any successful creative team is having a really rock solid workflow on the back end from a software perspective. You get a mixed bag across the board when you look into. So between my two tours of duty with Fuji Xerox, I had I probably worked in more organizations on a contract basis than I probably have in my entire career. And what I find really interesting is that there's no one business that takes the same approach. So they're all different. So it's about determining what's the best fit for that company. I'm a big fan of cloud-based solutions. There's less overhead. You get updates and validation to the product really frequently, which I think is really important. We're currently using Workflow Max, which I really love as a product. It's really flexible. It's by the Xero Group, but there's literally tons out there, and I think it's about finding one that fits your workflow as well. A lot of people are still using things like Trello to manage projects, which I love Trello, but it just doesn't quite have enough guts for me. But there's literally a ton of products, and all really, really good at what they do.
Yeah. What are some of the current design trends that you're seeing playing out in the corporate world, and how have they impacted you today?
That's an interesting one. I think, again, the circumstance we've found ourselves over the last 12 months has really accelerated a lot of these things. But for me, obviously, some of the key trends, video is obviously playing a really big part. As you can see, what we're doing right now. So video across all medium. So it's not just, obviously social's a big push, but it's not just social. And also too, is just in a very crowded marketplace, it's a point of difference that allows you to resonate more and sort of rise to the top of some of those conversations when you've got multiple streams of communication on the go. I mentioned before, for me, for what we're doing, multi-channel is really big. So we sort of take, if I was to summarize it, I'd say multi-channel approach and an omni-channel experience. It's so funny how many people mix the two up. So I think omni-channel is one thing. It's not at all. It's all channels, but it's a single experience. Big part of what we do and a big part of what I see is just personalization and targeted communications. So people are really trying to be quite strategic about not just the way they talk to someone, but what they're actually saying to them, so it's relevant and timely.
Yeah.
And big push to just simplifying communication. You'll see a lot of executions at the moment sort of focus on using infographics and data visualizations to distill really complex things into something that's digestible quickly, because people just don't have a huge amount of time anymore to pore over pages of information. They want to know what's happening as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, some designers and creatives that are skeptical about making that move from agency to a career in-house. You've been a designer yourself. What would you say to them about, the positives, the challenges, the complexities? What is that reward that they can expect if they do decide to take that path of the career client side?
Yeah, sure. It is just different. It's really different. Obviously, the first thing and I mentioned this before, the move away from agency life for me was just about trying to get a bit of balance back. So it is nice to get your life back. It's not to say that it isn't challenging. You still don't get long hours and lots of things. I think I'm on my third or fourth 65-hour week at the moment.
Oh,
so grateful after April. I think one of the big points too is that in an agency where you tend to get direction from an account management team and you've got a creative team sort of driving an execution, things can be relatively straightforward. I think one of the benefits you get in a client side is you get an opportunity to help shape the narrative a bit. So you can drive, someone might come to the table with a specific brief and you get to suggest and drive different executions and actually offer a huge amount of value in that process. So I think the other thing too is I spoke before about the less the stakeholder knows, the harder your job gets. And that is really quite pertinent client side. You can have 5 conversations in a day and one could be extremely powerful and articulated really well. You could be dealing with the marketing team one day and someone in the warehouse the next day. So you need to adapt your style and the way you communicate and even just your language to suit the audience that you're dealing with.
Yeah. Jason, as always, I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed our time together. You've had such an interesting career and I'm really grateful that you spent some time to share that with us today.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. Hope to see you soon.
Lovely. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.